Good evening, and we start tonight with a truism. The only reason why anyone bought one of the old Land Rover Discoveries was because they couldn't afford a Range Rover. Now, though, we've got this new Land Rover Discovery, and on the face of it, things aren't quite so simple. Let's go through the headlines first. With 7 seats, it's more practical than a Range Rover. It's bigger than a Range Rover, more powerful than a Range Rover, faster than a Range Rover, and with prices starting at £27,000, it's quite a lot cheaper than a Range Rover as well. It all sounds great, but if you dive behind the headlines, the story's less rosy. First of all, it's a lot bigger than the old Disco, as you can see. But with the back seats in place, the boot is not what you'd call commodious. Then there's the problem of actually getting into those back seats, because what you've got to do is put the headrest down, tilt that, and then lift the whole seat up like so. Now this works well and very easily in the world of TV. But in the real world, I'm not so sure. You see, in the real world, Discoveries tend to be bought by people who have children. And if you get back to your car carrying a Harry, how are we going to do that with one arm? Someone wasn't thinking. There's more evidence of that too with this control panel, which allows children in the back to adjust the volume and the radio station. Oh, I'd love that. Oh, I'd really love that. As a family car then, this is beaten by the Volvo XC90, which incidentally is a lot cheaper. There's another problem too. For complicated production reasons, this car has a sort of monocoque chassis like you get on a Range Rover. And then it's got a separate chassis, like you got on the old Disco. So it's got 2 chassis. As a result, it weighs 2.7 tons, and that makes it heavier than a Rolls-Royce Phantom. It's so heavy that if you were to load it up with stuff and then hitch up a trailer to the back, technically, you'd need an LGV licence. And then there's the performance to think about. I've got a turbo diesel engine in this one. It's from Jaguar and it's brilliant, very smooth and very refined. But putting it in a car this heavy is a bit like trying to move the moon out of orbit using the motor from a food blender. Put your foot down and, come on, kick down. It doesn't really happen. You can solve the problem if you go for the 4.4-litre petrol V8, which is also from Jaguar. But if you do that, you won't be driving past too many of these. I don't want you to get the impression, though, that the new Discovery is a bad car, because in some ways, it's very good. First of all, it's a handsome-looking brute. Looks like the kind of thing you might expect to find on a lunar space station. Inside, it's nowhere near as stylish as a Range Rover, but nor is it as utilitarian as a barn. And you do get an awful lot of equipment as standard. Seems well made too, which is odd for those who know Land Rovers of old. On top of all this, it's really not bad to drive. I mean, it's not as luxurious, let's say, as a Range Rover, but for something this high, it doesn't roll in the corners as much as you might think, and the ride's exceptional. But then, of course, it would be, because it's got 2 chassis. It doesn't go over bumps, it just flattens them. Now, we could sit here all day long, frankly, with me saying, I don't really like that, but I quite like that. But there's no point, because overall, I like the new Discovery. I like the way that it no longer feels or looks like the Range Rover's rather stupid rural cousin. And yet, it still feels like the real deal. It may end up being used in Shepherd's Bush, but unlike most of the other Chelsea tractors you can buy these days, it feels like it could also be used by shepherds. In the bush. In fact, Land Rover are adamant that despite the air conditioning and the thick carpets, this car does work on the rough stuff. To find out whether it really does work off-road, I've come up with one hell of a challenge. See, I'm going to try and drive this car to the top of that mountain. And no one has ever driven a car up there before, ever. This is Mount Cron and Riccardan, which stands at the top of Scotland, 1,007 feet above sea level. When you examine the terrain, it's easy to see why no car's ever been to the top before. There are rocky outcrops, peat bogs, sheer cliff faces, the lot. This is going to be quite a trip.